Hello, George.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Today I'm talking to George Trombley, who's a very interesting man. He's into Asian languages, and I think the first one he learned was Japanese. And today I want to talk about how to learn Japanese with George. Remember, if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe, click on the bell for notifications. If you follow me on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any other podcast source, leave a review. Much appreciated. George lives in Las Vegas, where we go to make money on the slot machine. But George speaks Japanese, Korean, and other languages. I would like to first of all ask George, what do you think? What is the best way to learn Japanese?
It's a big question, but I think the first question that I always think about when I think if someone wants to learn a language, I think, are they interested in the country? Are they interested in the culture? Is there something that fascinates them about it that would keep driving them? Because as you know, learning a language isn't just something you go, oh, I'm going to learn a language, and a month later you have the language. There's a lot of effort that has to go into it. I think, so if for example, you like J-pop music, you listen to music. If you like some sort of drama in Japanese or some sort of game that's Japanese that you could get your hand on the Japanese version, I think a good thing to do is kind of follow your hobby. But if you're talking about, of course, obviously I teach Japanese, right? So I'm speaking in general terms right now. Right. But let's say you decide, okay, I want to learn Japanese. So in my way of learning, I did the same thing with Korean. I was in a classroom in Japan and I went to classes in Korea actually, but you don't have to do that nowadays because the internet provides so much access to Korean teachers or Japanese teachers that, I would say, hey, get a Japanese teacher, find a channel on YouTube, find some tools that are like Link, for example. Find some tools that will help you learn and just bust through the basic grammar. I really believe you should go through the basic grammar as fast as you can and learn the writing system. That would be the step one, I would say.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, you have learned Japanese to a high degree of proficiency and Korean. What was your motivation? You said get motivated by something. So what motivated you to learn Japanese?
Well, Japanese was, it's the same for Japanese and Korean for me, but the start of Japanese was, I was 12 and my father was a military contractor. His company had a contract with the military, and that led us to be up in Japan in 1985. So I was 12. I was in 6th grade on the military air base, and one of the classes that I was required to take was Japanese. So that got me started. And I think it wasn't until maybe about the next year or after that when I started thinking about girls, and Japanese girls to me were attractive. So I just was motivated by that initially. And then the continued motivation for me was I started listening to J-pop, like I said. And of course I had access to a lot of fun Japanese TV. Every week I was watching the Japanese top 10 to see the artists that I love. I learned the lyrics of the music. I joined the fan club. I went to the concerts. I did all of that. I was a weeb. I don't know if you know that term. Before weebs were probably a thing. Okay. I just really loved everything Japan at the time.
Now let's suppose that you're not 12 or 15 and you're not chasing Japanese girls and you're not into J-pop. Let's say that you're 30 or 25. Obviously something has to motivate you. So it could be anime, it could be any number of things. How about the learning methodology? My experience has been that the grammar, if you just get it up front, it's very difficult to relate it to anything until you have enough exposure to the language.
I absolutely agree.
Right.
So this is the problem, I think, that I see a lot of people, not with grammar in per se. I see a lot of people, when they start learning Japanese, they immediately want to jump into learning kanji, for example. So, and it's easy to start learning kanji and then have that as your badge, right? Like, I know 400 kanji. I now know 500 kanji. But in the end, you don't know really how to use that kanji. I always like to call it a parlor trick. Right. It's something you can brag about. And I think even a lot of times classes or teachers sometimes, if they get a student that goes that direction, they let them go that direction because it's an easy way to grade them to say, hey, oh, look, my student made this progress. But really, that's a mistake. I believe that like you said, you can get up to JLPT level in grammar, the Japanese language proficiency test level 1, and maybe not even know how to have great conversation. So what I always think is you learn grammar, you learn a grammar point, and then you try to find a way to use it. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it, and you don't want to learn above what you really are capable of doing. This is what I always believe. Like when, for example, when I was learning Korean, I went to Korea and I took a group class in the morning and I took a private class after that, or sometimes I flipped it. And then whatever I learned that day, I would kind of keep in my head. And that night I would go out to what they have these language meetups that you can do in Korea where people get together that are learning English and Korean and Japanese and German. It's actually really fascinating. And I would go to those and I would just, in my mind, I would think, I'm going to use this grammar. The minute you use a grammar, you build a bigger connection in your brain and it becomes more natural. Now, I don't recommend that when you're doing something like that, if you learn a new grammar, never preface it. Don't say, hey, can I test this new grammar with you? Because then the native speaker is going to be on the outlook. What I like to do is use the grammar, see what happens. Sometimes, especially in Korean, I would learn a grammar, not fully understand the implication of that grammar, and get a huge laugh. And now, I don't know exactly why it's funny, but now I know, okay, there's something about that makes it funny. So the next time I do it again, and I start building an understanding of why people are laughing at that particular grammar, right?
Right.
But without that experience, you could blindly say things that are rude. For example, I'm just going to barrel through one more. My video editor, Mike, he's learning Japanese, and he was saying a complicated sentence to me the other day, and he used nante in Japanese in a really weird way, and it sounded like he said something like Eriko-san ga oishii ryori ga tsukureru nante, which could mean, oh man, I can't believe you can actually make delicious cooking.
Right.
But he wasn't trying to say that. He didn't understand the implications of what nante does. So without using that grammar, now the first time he uses it, he might have made that mistake, but he would have learned right away that wasn't good to do. So using it absolutely right away is the best thing to do.
Right.
Don't use words that you're not going to use. Don't learn kanji. I'm a big fan of just-in-time learning. After you get the basics down, just-in-time learning for those things.
Right. Interesting. I mean, everyone has a different approach. In my case, I had learned Chinese beforehand, so I had the kanji. So that was not an issue. I tend to favor, as you know, a lot more input before I speak, unless I'm there. Like in your situation, you were in Japan, you were in Korea, you have all kinds of opportunity to use the language. I guess one of the messages there is that there's many different roads that are going to take us to success in language.
Absolutely.
And it depends on your circumstance. But so you were totally into Japanese learning, and then all of a sudden you got interested in Korean. Why did you get interested in Korean?
Can I go back just a second though and talk about the input? So input is something I highly recommend a lot. One of the things so I have the video series on YouTube, and one thing I constantly recommend to people is for them to listen to Japanese radio.
Right.
Find a good podcast or a radio, but it can't be one. I firmly believe it shouldn't be one that's designed for students of Japanese or designed for students of Korean.
100%
I want full-blown, full-speed, fully actuated Korean or Japanese so that your brain can hear things that you're not going to hear in a classroom. Because it's, in a sense, when you're learning in a classroom, it's fun and all, but it's classroom Japanese. Yeah. It's a subset of Japanese. And, even me, before I went to Korea, I learned with a meetup group here. So I had learned those kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like really clean sentences,
right,
that have no advanced grammar because it's a lower level sentence and it's not said in a way with any ums or ahs, But then you go to Korea or you go to Japan and all of a sudden you're in a convenience store and they say something super basic back to you, but you've never heard it. You've never been exposed to it. But if you had been watching dramas or listening to people speak, your brain would have picked up things. I did it with Chinese too.
The thing is, podcasts, now you mentioned something. I've had trouble finding good podcasts in Korean and Japanese.
Oh, I can recommend some.
Yeah, I think my listeners would be very interested in getting lists of good. And as
I can give you two right now if you'd like.
Sure. Well, I'll put them in the description box. Okay, tell me what they are.
And I'll say it in a way that it's easy to find.
Right.
So one is a super casual one. If you look up, the full Japanese name is something like Konkatsu Stylisto JURI. But if you look up JURI in a podcast app, and she also has a YouTube channel. She's a fairly minor one.
Right.
But the topics that she talks about are very interesting. It's about
Great.
it's people that want to get married,
Right.
and they're asking dating questions to her. So she will receive a question from a guy,
Right.
and then she'll read the question, then answer it. But she's speaking clearly and on an interesting lower level topic because
Right.
it's about relationships.
Right.
So
That's
one
super.
that's short.
And as you say, those kinds of things have resonance. Whereas what you get in the classroom has no resonance. The narrator is bored. The content is uninteresting. Whereas, so JURI. Okay. That's one.
Yep, JURI. And the second one
Yeah.
that I love for the quality of sound and the fact that it's really high level, but yet they're still speaking in a normal speaking tone. It's Cozy Up, COZY Up. The full name of the show is something like something news Koji Up in
Right.
katakana.
Right.
But that one is excellent because
Okay.
they open up with a news item.
Right.
And it's like NHK, this is the day they do, blah, 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 but they say the news very kind of formal. And then they go, okay, we're here today with commentator so-and-so. And then they go back and forth and talk about it. So now this is something I even recommend if you're new, it's fine. Because they're speaking in very normal terms.
Right.
Just every now and then you're going to hear things that are super high level, but guess what? It doesn't matter what you listen to in the beginning. You're not going to understand any of it anyway.
So just again, so JURI, Jury is
Yeah.
one.
Yep.
And the other one is Cozy Up. COZY.
Zet. Yes.
COZY up. Or Z,
Yeah.
depending on.
They also have a YouTube channel. So you
Okay.
can get it on like a podcast app or a YouTube channel.
Okay.
Those are two for
Do
that. Now,
either of them have transcripts?
not that I know of.
Not that you know of. Okay.
I know that that's important. I know it's important for Link,
right.
unfortunately. But yeah, they
you
don't.
can throw these onto a Happy Scribe automatic transcription service, and it's kind of 90% okay. All right, that's very good.
The thing about
very good. Well, how about Korean?
yeah, and the thing about these things. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, do you have some good podcasts for Korean?
I have an excellent one for Korean.
Mm-hmm.
It's called 2시에 데이트. Now you're not going to find that one in English. It means 2:00 date, and it's I think one of the longest running Korean radio shows in all of Korea. I listen to it all the time, and every year or so they'll change the announcer. My opinion firmly is that the last announcer was the best, but now it's
We're
two
gonna
people that
get
talk
these.
back and forth.
Somehow we're going to find these. I'm going to put them in the description box.
I'm going to link. I'll send you the links.
Okay.
Let me see if there's anything. Let me see. Let me just see quickly if I can easily give you something that identifies that one easier. But yeah, that one's good because it's two people talking and they go rapid fire through topics.
Right.
And then what they'll do is they'll introduce something that like a housewife in Busan had a problem, and then so the topics change fresh enough
Right.
so that if your Korean is intermediate level, there might be one particular thing where all of a sudden you understand.
Right.
And then the next topic will come and you might understand. So I call that like this random pocket of understanding. And my Korean significantly improved just listening to that for 30 or 40 minutes, like as I was driving around.
But,
And once you get good, you start thinking, oh wow, I'm actually enjoying the content. You stop thinking about, oh, I'm speaking Korean.
right. But what I get from you, and I think the big lesson is your enthusiasm, your willingness to not understand, your willingness to be in a situation where you can't quite say what you want to say, you don't quite understand everything that's being said, and you're happy nevertheless, and you just throw yourself into it. And in that, that approach is actually better than sitting in a classroom trying to nail everything down, wanting to understand everything, and never getting beyond that classroom.
You will learn so many things that the teacher would never think to teach you by listening to people talk.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want them, Steve, I've got on here. So what I do is I get the podcast and then I put I rename it so that it goes in order. I rename my like J, close parenthesis, K, close parenthesis.
Right.
I have Vietnamese. I have Russian.
Wow.
Whatever I was learning for the moment, I would get it. I have 2 or 3 good German ones. So I can give you a good Chinese one if you want one too.
How many languages are you working on?
Well, I'm striving to be the next Steve Kaufmann.
You got a few more years to go, though, so that's
I know.
good. Good
Well,
for
you really inspired me because when I heard you were 75 and you got 20 languages, I thought, well, I'm 48, right?
Yeah.
I've got Japanese, Korean. I'm fairly happy with my Chinese, although I do need more work.
Right.
I started German.
Right.
And then once, what's his name? Oh my gosh, I shouldn't forget this. Lao Shu, 55,000.
Yeah.
When he passed away,
Right.
I had only a brief interaction with him, and it wasn't a positive one, fortunately. But when he passed away,
Yeah.
I went up to his channel and I watched more of his stuff. I found out how young he was, and I saw on his Facebook he's doing these really weird languages that I would never think to learn.
Right.
And then I thought that guy had inspired so many people.
Yeah.
I thought, what am I doing? I'm just sitting here not learning more languages. So that day, I booked Tagalog, which I really love. Tagalog is amazing.
Okay.
And Vietnamese.
Right.
So,
I mean, Lao Shu was amazing. Very humble guy. Interested in, didn't mean Hmong, Georgian, you name it.
Right?
Like the guy was, and he had such a breadth of interests in terms of languages. Another guy who's doing that is Richard Simcott. I just saw him speaking Estonian. And people, I think, we don't have to be perfect in these languages. It's such a delight to discover a new language, to explore a new language. So good for you. Absolutely good for you.
It really is. There's a subset in the Japanese community, and I haven't seen it in the Korean community yet, where they're striving for perfection.
Oh yeah.
Or they put a lot of emphasis on.
You mean the Japanese learning community?
In the Japanese learning community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never been my thing.
No.
I saw a TED Talk once, and it really summed up everything I've ever believed about learning a language. Is that language is a tool, not an art to master. And it's a tool
for communicating. It's also a tool for discovering more about different cultures, different countries, and stuff like that. It's not synchronized diving at the Olympic Games.
Right.
I mean, we don't have to achieve perfection.
Although
if that's what people want to do, that's fine too.
Well, that's the thing. It really is, especially nowadays. If you want to strive for perfection, you can. But my question is, what's your goal?
Right.
Is that your goal? Or for me, my goal is to make friends in the country, always.
Right. Yeah.
Like 100%. So my goal in a new language is to get to friends that don't speak English.
Right.
So that there's no influence of the Western mind on them.
But one more thing, though, is that by learning, say, Tagalog or Korean or whatever you're learning, you have a different perception of those people. Like, those people come alive. All of a sudden, that's just not a place on the globe or a map. Those are real people now. You have a bit of a sense, not maybe very deep yet, but a bit of a sense of those people that's much more alive than when you have never even spoken or understood any of their language.
Well, if I can add to that and say something slightly controversial, if you're living in America, that's where I live now, so I see this, we don't really understand foreigners because we're America.
Right.
And we're number one and everyone speaks English, right?
Right.
So we're used to non-natives speaking English in maybe not a perfect way, right? So then maybe we think, oh, they're not so smart. But the minute you start speaking their language, you realize they are really smart, just like we are. And it's a controversial thing because that's a weird thing to say. But I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I made a friend in Korea through Hello Talk, which is an amazing app that I absolutely love.
Right.
And when I first met her, I just thought she was kind of dumb, like just not super intelligent. But it was my Korean level that needed to increase. Because once I spoke more Korean, I found out she was deep thinking. She had deep thoughts. She was just a quiet person. Well,
this is the problem. This is why people are intimidated about speaking another language, because they consider themselves intelligent in their own language. It doesn't matter who you are, American, Chinese, whatever. And you realize that when you're speaking this foreign language, all of a sudden you're less intelligent. So
you're dumb.
Most adults don't like that. Like, kids don't care. Kids just want to, play with their friends. But an adult thinks, well, I'm an educated person in my language, whatever it may be, and now I'm going to speak this other language, and all of a sudden I'm less, or at least come across as less educated. That never bothered me, but there are people who are bothered by that. And I think we have to get beyond that and just strive to communicate and not worry about how, whatever imperfections there are in how we use the language. I mean, we all like to improve. We all like to improve. That's fine.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating when you're learning a new language because you know how to say things in English.
Mm-hmm.
And even for me, I already knew how to say things in Japanese.
Right.
Now I can't say them in Korean or I can't say them in Chinese. So you get very frustrated. And this is a common thing that I see over, these 20 plus years of teaching Japanese and now Korean. So I give this advice all the time. I say what you can say, not what you want to say.
Yeah. I must say that I don't find it frustrating when I can't say things because I then reflect back on where I was 6 months earlier. So
you're also a veteran. You're a veteran language learner, so you're aware, and I'm aware of that too.
So I say, look at me. All of a sudden, I can say things in Persian or Arabic. I can't quite nail it the way I would like to. I keep on forgetting things that I know these words, and I can't find them when I'm speaking. But so what? Look at me now versus 6 months earlier. So we have to give ourselves credit for what we've done.
Yeah, you have to recognize where you are. And I think, we're like that frog in a boiling, pot that we don't realize how hot it got.
Right.
But in a better way, we don't know how good we've got until we compare ourselves to someone else or we start another language.
But why don't we end it here?
Okay.
Okay. And the main thing that you exude is enthusiasm plus a lot of experience in learning these languages and helping others learn. So thank you very much for the conversation.
All right. Hey, thanks. See you next time.
Okay.
Have a good day, Steve.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yep.